Since then, out of the hiding place of Corrie, working with a committee of the German Lutheran Church, Corrie opened the camp in Darmstadt in 1946 as a home and place of renewal. It functioned in this way until 1960, when it was torn down to make room for new construction in a thriving new Germany. The home in Bloemendaal served ex-prisoners and other war victims exclusively until 1950, when it also began to receive people in need of care from the population at large. It is still in operation today in its own new building with patients from many parts of Europe. Since 1967, it has been governed by the Dutch Reformed Church. Willem died of tuberculosis of the spine in December 1946. He wrote his last book, A Study of Sacrifice in the Old Testament, standing because the pain of his illness would not allow him to sit at a desk. Just before his death, Willem opened his eyes to tell Tini, "It is well, it is very well with Kik." It was not until 1953 that the family learned definitely that his 20-year-old son had died in 1944 at the concentration camp in Bergen-Belsen. Today, a 10-boom street in Hilversum honors Kik. As a result of his wartime experiences, Pieter van Woerden dedicated his musical gifts to God's service. In addition to composing devotional songs, including a setting for the Psalms and Proverbs, he carried out an international music ministry. He eventually traveled with his wife and 5 children as a family singing group, bearing the message of God's love throughout Europe and the Middle East. In 1959, Corrie was part of a group that visited Ravensbrück, which was then in East Germany, to honor Betsy and the 96,000 other women who died there. There, Corrie learned that her own release had been part of a clerical error. 1 week later, all women her age were taken to the gas chamber. When I heard Corrie speak in Darmstadt 1968, she was 76, still traveling ceaselessly in obedience to Betsy's certainty that they must tell people. Her work took her to 61 countries, including many unreachable ones on the other side of the Iron Curtain. To whomever she spoke, African students on the shores of Lake Victoria, sorry, I'm in the woods. African students on the shores of Lake Victoria, farmers in a Cuban sugar field, prisoners in an English penitentiary, factory workers in Uzbekistan. She brought the truth the sisters learned in Ravensbrück. Jesus can turn loss into glory. John and I made some of those trips with her, the only way to catch this indefatigable woman long enough to get the information we needed to tell her story. Even with an unscheduled evening ahead of us in some hotel room in Austria or Hungary, it was hard to get her to think back. She was impatient with questions about past events, all her attention centered on next morning's breakfast meeting with local pastors or the coming rally for young people. Oh, those teenagers will be so happy to know that God loves them. Our best talks came during the time she stayed in our home in Chapakui. Our own teenage kids loved her visits, loved her ability to laugh at herself, like the time the chocolate ice cream from the first cone she had ever eaten kept running down her hand onto her blouse and shoes. No, Aunt Corrie, you have to lick around the bottom of the scoop. Watch, like this. Most of all, they loved the fact that each of them was as important to her as the loftiest church leader or city mayor. They loved the simple, concrete way she could convey theological abstractions. I remember the time 13-year-old Liz and I were helping Corrie unpack. From the bottom of the suitcase, Liz lifted a folded cloth with some very amateur-looking needlework on it, uneven stitches, mismatched colors, loose threads, snarls. "What are you making?" Liz asked, bewildered. "Oh, that's not mine," Corrie said. "That's the work of the greatest weaver of all." Liz looked dubiously at the tangled mess. "But Liz," Corrie told her, "you're looking at the wrong side." She took the sorry thing from Liz's hand. This is what our lives look like from our limited viewpoint. Then, with a flourish, Corrie shook open the cloth and turned it around to display a magnificent crown embroidered in red, purple, and gold. But when we turn over the threads of our lives to God, this is what He sees. In her mid-80s, failing health brought an end to Corrie's missionary journeys. Friends provided Corrie a retirement house in Orange County, California. But of course, even bedridden and for the last 5 years unable to speak, Corrie never stopped witnessing to God's love. You would come to cheer her up, but you would be the one who would leave that silent bedroom, spirit mysteriously and gloriously renewed. At 11 at night on her 91st birthday, April 15, 1983, Corrie, in the phrase she had always used, went home at last. For readers of guideposts who had followed Corrie's adventures, and for myself most of all, I wrote down my reaction to the news of her death. This is what follows. I tried to be glad for Corrie when the phone call came from California. She'd waited for her homecoming so long, but death, from the perspective of Earth, means saying goodbye. Feeling my loss, I roamed our house, touching one by one the physical objects she'd given us over the years. An antique brass kettle, a small square picture frame, an even smaller round one. Little things that recall big truths our friends shared. The kettle spoke to me about priorities. It was Betsy who'd spied it, dented and soot encrusted in a junkyard one morning on her way to the market. She bought it with the meat money. "Betsy," cried Corrie, coming upstairs from the watch shop, "what are we going to do with that old thing? Look, it won't even hold water." "It was not meant to hold water," Betsy replied with dignity. "Well, what's it for then?" "It's not for anything." "Oh, Corrie, wait till I get the grime off. Can't you just see the morning sun glowing on the spout?" "I got stew meat instead of roast," she hurried on. "You know stew is really easier for Father to chew. And I'm not hungry today. Oh, Corrie, this kettle will go on shining long after we've forgotten what we had for dinner tonight." And so it did. It shone for the hunted people who found shelter at the Bee. It shone for Corrie when she returned there alone from Vietnam, from the concentration camp, and from her tireless trips to Russia, China, Vietnam. It shines in our home today, saying, what feeds the soul matters as much as what feeds the body. In the square frame is a piece of yellow cloth cut in the shape of a 6-pointed star. Across the star are 4 black letters, Jood, the Dutch word for Jew. When I was in Holland researching Corrie's story, she took me to the home of Mayor Mossel, Eusebius, during the Nazi occupation. We sipped tea while Corrie and Eusie reminisced. You take your pipe with you, Corrie reminded him, recalling the practice drills. But you'd forget your ashtray, and I'd have to come running after you. Eusie sat down his cup and crossed the room to a massive antique sideboard. From the bottom drawer, buried beneath a pile of table linen, he drew out a scrap of yellow cloth cut in the shape of a star. All these years I wondered why I saved this thing. There's some people coming.